Welcome to the InnerTuning podcast. My name is Richard Matisaw. This podcast focuses on the life story, teachings, and sounds of Sri Shyamji, the founder of the Chakra Institute and creator of the InnerTuning system for sustainable psychological and spiritual growth. In these episodes, we will share many fascinating stories and explore topics that include the science of spirituality, the path to enlightenment, the yoga of sound, sound healing, the chakras and microchakras, three-body purifications, and much more. To learn more about the Chakra Institute and Sri Shyamji's workshops, visit the website ChakraInstitute.com. In this inaugural episode of the InnerTuning podcast, we will speak with Sri Shyamji about how sound has been an integral part of his life journey. From self-healing to meeting his guru in the Himalayas, playing concerts with musical greats like Ravi Shankar, experiencing the microchakras, and developing InnerTuning as a practical and systematic way to help people progress on their spiritual paths. In this episode, we will also learn about Sri Shyamji's childhood in India and how he came to the U.S. in the first place. So let's jump right in. Sri Shyamji, can you tell us how you first got interested in sound?
I got interested in sound because I was born with double pneumonia. And all my childhood, I experienced chest pain. And my father, being eye surgeon and knew all kinds of doctors, they just couldn't do anything. Painkillers were a very poor option, but I had to live on them for the first 12 years of my life. One day, it just so happens that I met a holy man. There are many holy men in India walking around all the time. We can see them, so it was not a surprise. But he was a very exceptional person because he knew about my chest pain, he knew about my family, he knew about my 7 generations. He gave me the names of everybody. That was really remarkable, not only for me, but for my father as well when I told him about my story of meeting this man. And then my grandfather knew one more name, and there are still 2 names that nobody knows. So we just give him the benefit of the doubt that he was really a very, very enlightened being that I can, if I can call anybody enlightened, he really was. And meeting him just changed my life because he taught me how to breathe and how to make sounds. 2 things gradually improved my breathing, my chest pain. And whenever I would forget to do them, it will come back. It would come back even now if I don't do my sadhana, my spiritual work properly. So that's how it began.
And where in India were you and how did you meet him?
Well, the first 11 years of my life, I was in an area which is at the border of Afghanistan. My father had a big eye hospital of his own, and then every summer we would go for vacation, naturally, because he could not do any surgery in the hot climate. So you go to the mountains, and that year, 1947, we went to Mussoorie, which is a beautiful hill near Dehradun, the foothills of the Himalayas. After the vacation in July, we were coming back. When we reached Punjab, there were some disturbances going on. So my father halted for some time, hoping that when things calm down, we will go back. Well, in August, the country was divided. We never went back home. And my father had spent everything that he had brought on vacation. We had no choice but to just be where we were. And then he decided he had some friends in Dehradun, which is near Mussoorie, where we were vacationing. So we decided to go back to Dehradun. And it was in Dehradun that I met him. which is also another story. We boys, see, this being a terminus station, the train really slows down by the time it reaches the train station. So what we would do, we would just take a train and go down 5-7 miles and we'll steal some lychee fruit from the orchard. And then on the way back, we just catch the train by running a little bit. Well, I guess that day I picked a few more lychees than I should have. I missed the train. So I had to wait for the next train to come, which was not very, very long. So while I was waiting and I was eating those sour lychees, I heard a remarkable sound, a voice, which could have been human, which could have been not human. It was difficult to tell. But it was such an extraordinary sound. And I would just walk in one direction or another to try to find the source of it. Where is it coming from? Whichever direction I go, it seems like it's coming from there. And finally, I closed my eyes and I sat down because I couldn't figure out where the sound was coming from. And when I opened my eyes, it was just a little a little hillock. And there's a man sitting there, ancient looking, thin, tall, sitting in a full lotus posture. And he had an iron trishul, a trident. He was just right next to him. And he called me by my first name. And then he told me the story of all the people that he knew about in my family. So first I thought, my father is an eye doctor. He probably knows about him and my grandfather. But when he told me 7 different names in my family, that was quite impressive. Then he told me also that he was my teacher in my last life. And I didn't believe in last life because I came from a family of medical doctors. They don't believe in last life. So I just laughed it off. And then he said to me that next Saturday, if you have a chance, go to this particular place. It will help you. That's all he just said. It was a temple, Shiva temple, called Tapkeshwar, which was about 5 miles away from where I lived. So I bicycled my way there, and sure enough, he was there. And then that was the day he gave me my first mantra, a breathing exercise, and how to make the sounds. And that was life-changing.
What a remarkable story. It's amazing how fortuitous things can happen like that.
Well, things happen because they are supposed to happen.
So the teachings that he passed on, are they associated with anything specific?
Well, he used to call it naada yoga, but when you read the texts of naada yoga, they don't really tell you how to make sound. They just tell you that there are some sounds that when people do spiritual work, they begin to hear some nadas, some sounds that open up, sometimes a flute and sometimes a chirping of the crickets, or when you sit to meditate, all kinds of sounds, they do happen. But he just taught me that don't go by the books, but when you will be sitting and doing your work, you will start to hear some sounds, so don't get afraid or anything. Because I was just a boy. I was nearly 13 years old when I met him on May 12, and I was born on June 15. So I was just a month short of 13. But I liked the way he approached me and the way he taught. I mean, it was just unbelievable. That's all I can say. And the effect of his teachings, precise, concise, and very short time to spend, not sitting for hours to meditate, because he taught me that the voice can produce an element called Surya Akasha. I tried to look for that word in Naada Bindu Upanishada, in the other tantras that deal with sound. Nowhere do I find that word, Surya Akasha. Akasha, I knew about it, the fifth element in the yoga system that you have, the 5 chakras, for example. The 5th chakra deals with the element of Akasha. But that the voice can produce Surya Akasha, that I did not know. And I did not produce Surya Akasha for 16, 17, maybe 20 years. It was in my 30s that I first time could identify with Surya Akasha that he was talking about. Because when he chanted, it was a wave of Surya Akasha. And I thought I'll never be able to produce that kind of an effect from my voice. He was ancient and still he had such vibrant voice. It's absolutely incredible. Nobody knows his age. I mean, people had stories about it. Some people thought he was 150 years old. Other people, Indian people, they believe in everything. 200 years old, some people said. And when I asked him about his age once, he says, "You can ask me better questions."
That's funny. Well, you bring up so many interesting topics, and throughout the episodes, we're going to have a chance to go deeper in the topics, Surya Akash, the chakras, the teachings that you learn, the teachings that you also pass on, and all of this material is so fascinating and ripe that it's exciting to initiate these introductions and then to be able to go a little bit further in them as we continue the podcast. A question that comes up here for me is, how long did you stay with your teacher, and then where did you go from there and continue working with sound?
Well, I would go to collect milk in the morning. That was my duty, nearby. I would go on my bicycle. That would take me an hour because of driving and coming back. So I had a friend who was very poor in arithmetic. So I would help him solve his arithmetic problems, and he would go get the milk while I will go to the temple. That was the deal we had. So after 3-4 years, my father kind of suspected something. That is something he's doing that is not kosher, like you say. So he thought maybe I was having some kind of a girl somewhere that I visiting or something, whatever he thought. So he told my eldest brother, "I'm sending him to you. He will do the high school in your town." So I had to leave that town, and that was in 1951. I met him in 48. So September of 1951, I went to this little town called Pilibhit, and my eldest brother was a doctor there. And of course, I did my practices, and my teacher knew it anyway. He said to me that next month you will be going. That was in August. He said, next month, no, he didn't say you'll be going. He said, from next month I won't see you. I was shocked because I didn't know that. At that point, maybe my father didn't even know that. But he knew that I won't see him anymore.
So I'm wondering, a lot of people I know, and including myself, we learn from teachers, and then when that teacher's not available anymore or we move on, we feel like we aren't necessarily able to progress as well. How were you able to take that material from a few years and work with it going from there, and where did it lead you to? Did it make you travel? Did it need you to work with music? How did it progress for you to the next stage?
Well, the next stage was my belief in him and his teachings. And of course, the first year without him, I used to cry a lot. But after that, I got used to the idea that I don't have him anymore, but I have his teachings. So I became actually more particular about his teachings because I didn't have him to depend on. So in a way it turned out to be good in the hindsight. And then after the year of high school in 1952, I moved to a town called Bareilly, where the government gave us 0.5% of all the property we had left behind in Pakistan. So we got a house and 100 acres of land in a small little village. So my father moved from Dehradun to Bareilly, which was about 30 miles from the town where my brother was. So I moved to Bareilly. I went to Bareilly College. That's where I met some great friends, really, namely Pandit Jagdish Mohan, a great singer, and also a fantastic poet and artist, Harish Johari, who later on I brought to America, and we had many, many workshops together. And my relationships are very, very long-lasting. I mean, yeah. So then I stayed in Bareilly for 2-3 years, and after that I did graduation privately, taking Harish to be my teacher for philosophy. Philosophy and history were my major at the time. So I lived in Bareilly most of the time, and we traveled a lot with Harish in the poets' concerts and music concerts. So I had good taste for poetry, Urdu poetry especially, and of course philosophy. And then there was a mental hospital behind the college. And in my spare time, I would just go there and just look at the people, what kind of a people they are. Some of them were behind bars, some of them were in the open, but they were all mentally compromised people. And I kind of felt empathy towards them. So I would go and I would talk to them. And I remember one time I was holding on to those bars and talking to this man. And he was talking like a very sane person. And then he comes near and he spat at me. So I wiped myself. I said, my God, he's really crazy. That's why they probably have him behind bars. But I kept on going there. And finally, he started to open up to me. He told me his whole life story and so on. So how did he get there? Then the psychiatrist who was supposed to be on duty, he saw me several times coming there. So he asked me, he said, what are you doing here? I said, I'm a student of philosophy and psychology is part of my course. And I thought, I will see if I can learn something about people who are mentally compromised. He said, you are very talented. I said, why? He said, this man has improved in the last 3 months more than my drugs have done anything for him. So you have a talent to talk to people who are mentally compromised. And not only him, there were 2-3 other people as well. I mean, you can't impress a psychiatrist by talking to one of his patients. So he gave me a letter for my professor that, that this man has ability to be in the field of therapy. And that letter helped me a lot in my life because my brother had applied for my immigration to the United States when I was 12 years old. And he was in Stanford at the time. So after, in 1958, I got a letter from the American Embassy that was 12 years later, that if I want to migrate to the US, I can get the green card, so to speak. And in my resume that I sent, that letter played a very good role. So I had no difficulty getting a green card. And that's how I came to America.
That's amazing. When you came to America, were you playing music, or how were you working with sound when you came to America? And how did you start teaching? Who was your first student?
I actually never took any music lessons. I was very fond of listening to raga music. My best friend was Jagdish Mohan. He was like a giant of a singer. So I would, listen to him sing all the time. I'll be sitting on the handle of a bicycle. He's driving the bicycle, and I'm just holding on, keeping the rhythm while he's singing. That's how my ears got trained in listening to music so closely. And I had another friend who was a flute player. So my ears were very, very trained to appreciate music. But in terms of playing something, I had no talent to be a musician. But I used to play tambura, which is a background drone instrument that anybody can play, really. But some people can play better, of course. So one story is very important to share with you. Allah Rakha and Ravi Shankar, the two great Indian musicians.
Of course.
Ravi Shankar, sitar player. I arranged a concert for them in San Francisco, and that was the largest concert he had ever played outside of India. 3,300 people. Nobody knew him. So, but I loved the sitar music, so I thought people should be able to hear it. And I had about friends of about 100 people or more, and we made all kinds of paintings of theirs, put them in the North Beach and everywhere in San Francisco. We had 3,300 people. Hall was full. He was so taken that he spent one night with me in my apartment in San Francisco. And in the morning, I usually get up early and I do some chanting, and I play the tambura for my own, shall I say, sadhana. Later, during the breakfast, their breakfast starts around 11:30, 12 o'clock when they wake up. I wake up at 4:35 in the morning. So, but he got up to go to the bathroom, and he heard some sounds coming from my bedroom. So he just heard them for a few minutes, and he went back to sleep. So he was telling me, he says, "What instrument was that you were playing?" I said, "It was tambura." "No, tambura doesn't sound like that." I said, "Well, that's the way I play it." So he just took a note of it, and then he went to London from there. As it turns out, his star had just started to shine, because the first time 3,300 people in San Francisco, and the following week he goes to London, and George Harrison, one of the Beatles, they came to a small concert he was doing in a basement of a museum, because he was not very well known in England. And he became his disciple, and Ravi Shankar became a household name. When the Beatles are your disciples, you get the popularity. When he went back to Bombay, he wrote me a long letter. He says, "You have changed my life. And I got an invitation now to play sitar in Carnegie Hall, and I am coming there in September, such and such date. And I'd like you to come and play tambura with me."
Wow. What was that like?
I didn't believe it. Why would I be playing in Carnegie Hall? My Guruji alone will know. Because I had no idea that it will go that way. So I left San Francisco. I wanted to leave San Francisco anyway. So I sold some things, I gave away some things, and I packed a suitcase, and I moved as if I'm never going to go back. And that's exactly what happened. I shifted, in September, October, I traveled with him. 24 concerts we played on that tour, from Buffalo to Washington. Every major university, Carnegie Hall, and at the end, Lincoln Center, second concert. So I met a lot of people. I met Richard Alpert, Ralph Metzner, Alan Watts. No, Alan Watts I knew in San Francisco. What's his name? The poet, the vulgar poet, very famous, Allen Ginsberg. All these people, they were in the concert. So they gave me their phone numbers and so on and so on. So now Ravi Shankar left, and it's the month of November. Now I'm asking myself, nobody is there to pay for my hotel anymore. Where do I go tomorrow? Because excitement was over. I have no place to go to. I have no work. But I have some money, yes. So, Ralph Messner, he took a liking for me. He says, why don't you come to Castalia Foundation in Millbrook, New York, where I'll introduce you to Timothy Leary, who is doing research on consciousness through psychedelics. And you could do weekend workshops with sound. So, and I will make the study, the difference in the state of awareness through sound and visual. There was another artist over there. He used to make slides of different yantras. So he will be showing the slides and I'll be playing the tambura. And people are clean, totally clean, no smoking, no LSD or anything. Just plain sounds and visuals. So they were making studies of that, and it went on about 5-6 weeks. So that's how I met the psychedelic group, so to speak. At that point, I decided I'm going to go back to India for a while. Because I had the money I had saved. I spent a whole year in India. To be exact, 364 days. Because I had a green card, which did not allow me to go for more than a year. And that year was an eye-opener. I traveled a lot. I taught in a school for problem children. A lot of things I did in that year. And then in one of my visions or meditations, my Guruji appeared, and I asked him, I said, what am I going to do? And he said, go back to New York, play tambura and chant. That's all he said.
How did you transition from tambura as an accompanying instrument for musicians to using it with your sadhana or to work with others? And was there a moment where you had a first client that you started to experiment with?
That's another story. I am living $95 a month in a 5-room walk-up, 236 West 10th Street in New York, West Village. And there are 2 apartments on that floor. One I'm renting and one smaller one, a lady who lives there by herself. A lady in her mid-50s maybe. And sure enough, she was just telling, downstairs was a health food store. And I would buy my groceries there. I met her there and she could not carry her groceries, so I would take her groceries to her apartment. 2 or 3 weeks later, she says to me, I take a lot of painkillers because I have arthritis of the spine. But in the morning, when I hear these sounds coming through this wall, it feels so good. That she says, yesterday, for example, I wanted to sit snug against the wall because the sounds that were coming, when I felt them with my spine, my pain relieved. So she says, is it possible that I come and sit with you when you are playing this instrument? Because it might help me more. So then I had to say to her, I said, you have to sit with me. You have to wake up early, of course, which you do. But you have to really have a bowel movement, take a shower. You have to clean yourself and put some fresh clothes on before you come to my apartment at 5 a.m, That I didn't want to say no, at the same time I didn't want to say yes. So I made it conditional. And sure enough, she was determined. So according to her, she stopped taking her medication and her pain went away.
Wow.
So that was my first, you can call it client, student, whatever you want to call it. Then I started to work with her a little bit more seriously. And I would play tambura with my one hand and work with my right hand on her spine, just to relax and massage some of the pressure points I knew about in the yoga system. There are marmas all over. So I thought, that will help. Or that literally changed her lifestyle to the extent she didn't ask me to bring her groceries up anymore, which was a good thing for me.
It's so remarkable how working with sound can be so transformative. And nowadays there are all these modalities with sound healing and different things that people are calling this and that, and whether they're valid or not. My question is, and this is the last question for this episode, is from the perspective of Naada Yoga, what does sound healing really mean?
Sound healing means that, we are made up of these, now medical people say that human body is made up anywhere between of 70 to 100 trillions of cells. All these cells, they are so intelligent that some decide to become a liver, some decide to become lungs or whatever. But they all are basically vibrating. And what is keeping them together is the Surya Akasha, which I learned much later. So this Surya Akasha, it just binds your cells together. So when you are already purifying yourself in the morning, my students, they are required to wake up early and have a bowel movement. It's one of the most important activities of the day. I tell my students, you cannot drink anything unless you urinate in the morning. You cannot eat anything until you defecate. That way you will keep your system at the physical level as pure as possible. Because there are certain winds in the body that interact with other winds. In yoga system we say there are 5 major pranas. It's called apana prana, samana prana, prana prana, udan prana, vyan prana. And all of these are very pure life forces called prana. But the apana prana is a detoxifier. If that detoxifier does not do its job, it is going to influence the purity of these pure pranas that are naturally pure. But because of the apana prana, they become impure. And once they become impure, the problems start at some level or another. Whichever part of the body is weak, you're going to start to show some kind of symptoms over there. So therefore, purification is the name of the game. You really have to keep your body as pure as possible. And maybe later on I'll tell you that you have more than one body so that it doesn't come to you as a shock. So that is the way I started to work with people. And because I had saved some money from my days in San Francisco, it took me a year or so to exhaust all that money, but that was the money, that was my education. I started to work with other people. In those days, you remember, people used to get high on one drug or another, you name it, all the psychedelics. They were very, very popular. I met a drummer who was hooked on heroin, who became my lifelong friend as well, and my driver and my recording engineer and everything. So all these people came into my life because of my work. And I must have been seeing 20, 30 people a day, helping them overcome their addictions, and all for free.
Since a lot of the listeners are not familiar with Surya Akash and definitely not familiar with the direct experience Is it possible for you to share a short chant in closing this episode that might allow people to have that experience?
Well, I will chant a mantra in two different ways. One is the way most people are chanting, and one is the way that a naada yogi should be chanting. Same mantra in two different ways. Om Namah Shivaya, 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 Om Namah Shivaya. That is the way the mantras are chanted these days. Naada yogis, they don't breathe in with their mouth to chant, because you can't produce Surya Akasha if you don't breathe in with your nose. Because mantras are sacred sounds and they need pure prana. Pure prana you inhale with your nose, not with your mouth. When you breathe with your mouth, the air goes directly into the lungs and down. When you breathe in with your nose, the prana first goes to your brain, then goes down. So if you want to grow spiritually, you better start to learn to breathe with your nose. Now I'm going to chant how a mantra should be chanted. Namah Shivaya. Om Namah Shivaya. Namah Shivaya. Om Namah Shivaya.